everyone, and welcome to the Indigenous Voice. Today is March the 7th, and first I would like to say thanks to the volunteers and SHA staff who make this show possible. In the first part of our program today, we have with us Elder Tom Sampson, Elder Tuslak from the Startlip First Nation, and always it's whenever we had chance to have Elder Tuslak on the show, we try to catch that chance. Elder Tuslak, welcome to the show. And what is in your mind today? We were just talking a little bit ago about the last week event and other issue in regard to the progress in some matters like the land issue in regard to some tribes and Kinder Morgan. So what do you like to say today about this issue?
Well, I guess there is some progress being made to begin with. You know, there's some willingness, I believe, by the province to move ahead and try to do something. But because of the position of the federal government, in regard to Kinder Morgan, for example, they're determined to go ahead and do it. But because the issue is such a sensitive one, it's not just about opposing oil. That I think is one of the things that people are thinking, that, okay, we're against oil or against gas. That's not the issue. The issue is that it's going through our territory, our land, and our resources are at risk. And the ocean, the salmon, we know they're in trouble, the herring is in trouble, the birds are disappearing. So it's not just about opposing the gas company or Kinder Morgan. We believe they haven't taken into consideration the whole issue regarding environment and the land and the ocean, the sky, the gas, everything that affects the air. So we see that as people are attacking First Nations people on a basis we're opposed to Kinder Morgan. Kinder Morgan hasn't proved yet that there will never be an accident. And in our last show, I talked to you about the risks between the progress of the corporate world and the disaster that's happened not only in British Columbia but across Canada and around the world, for that matter. So there is no absolute guarantee that there will never be an oil spill or an accident in the ocean. And we believe the risks are too great to allow that to happen. And at this point in time in our history, we're not satisfied that the risks have been taken care of. We don't believe that. So I guess when it comes down to what happened in other parts of the world, in the United States, the Standing Rock issue, and many other issues in this country, the dam that broke down or fell apart in Quebec, and there's so many examples of disaster with whether it's oil, gas, mining,
or diesel.
It's happening here in British Columbia, Canada. And that doesn't seem to be enough evidence to prove to the government and the corporate world that the risks are too great yet. And no one is prepared to see more disaster. You know, the salmon, the sockeye, for example, the herring, they're not even herring fishing this year because the spawning grounds have been damaged beyond repair. So as the corporate world and government continue to devastate the resources, whether it's in the ocean or on the land, or pollution of the air, that has not been taken care of yet. And it's not going to, from our point of view, there's not enough evidence to prove that a disaster like that can't happen. Because in spite of promises and guarantees that there will never be an oil spill or none of the dams that are in place would ever come apart, the mining industry, well, it's happened. So how can we begin to have faith and trust in an industry that doesn't really care about the land?
Mm-hmm.
Now we've seen it in other parts of the world where all the resources have been gone, not only in North America,
Mm-hmm.
but in other countries, South Africa and other places where there's been total disaster. So we see it then as a very weak effort by the corporate world and the government in promising that nothing's going to happen. It won't happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty hard issue to convince when there's so much evidence that that's against the whole issue of not only Kinder Morgan but other businesses that the corporate world is involved in, and the disaster that it's left behind. You know, the whole thing in Alaska there a few years ago, it still hasn't come back yet. The resources are dead in the water, nothing. So how can they promise, you know, something when there's so much evidence that could devastate the ocean, like the Salish Sea? Because that's our way of life. It's everything that's in the water is something that we need. Not only indigenous people, but the non-Indian people need it too. But it's hard to convince the public that we knew what it was 60, 70 years ago. We knew what the land was like. And we've seen the devastation that's been created in the forest industry. And we've seen it in everything in the ocean. The pollution in the lower mainland, and in the summertime, when you go along Highway 1 going up in the interior, you can see the blue smoke. Sometimes you can't even see the mountain because of the air pollution is so bad. Not only from cars and trucks that are using fossil fuels that are causing this pollution. So they haven't been able to convince everybody, you know, and I think the Supreme Court of Canada made that absolutely clear, you know, that we must be able to be totally convinced, and we must be able to not only be convinced, but we should not be intimidated and be afraid of standing up and saying
Full
no.
consent.
And that's what's happening right now. People are fighting, they're saying no, not just indigenous people, but everybody. So we see this issue, you know, that we've been talking about now for the last couple of years on the devastation that's been created in British Columbia. And it's hard to see, you know, one person saw me in the street a few days ago. He said to me, "Mr. Sampson, do you really believe the world is coming to an end?" I said, "Well, my world has already come to an end. You know, it's already ended. All my food is gone. All our food from the ocean that we needed. All the birds that used to be in the sky are gone. Yeah, my world has ended." So how do you reconciliation when you're losing so much of a way of life? And how do you bring it back the way society has seemed to accept that, okay, we need gas, we need oil. You know, what happens if they turn the turbines off? What happens? Well, just got to go without it. because the risks are too great.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, there is new technology coming up. You know, the windmills, different way of providing electricity. It's already here. But the government is saying, well, you know, we're not ready for that yet. We need the gas and oil until such time as those alternatives are in place, then we can stop the oil business. But I don't think so. You know, the push by the corporate world is too great. It's too great. And when you get on the way, they declare war on us, you know. We've seen it before on the west coast of British Columbia, you know, with the Haida people trying to save Lyle Island and other places where they were going to log. And we've seen the resistance there. And what Canada's got to realize, and the province of British Columbia, is that, you know, you can only push people to a certain extent. And then you run into alternatives or options that none of us want. And I think that's where we're headed, by way of the attitude of government and the attitude of business. Because business is necessary, we know that. But at what cost? I think we have to ask ourselves that.
Elder,
what cost?
Elder Taslak, how do you see this resistance? I mean, how do you see this resistance formulated in a face of a project like Kinder Morgan and the federal government of the Canadian state? How do you what form of resistance you would like to see?
Well, you know, government is good at doing this. They say, well, you know we're going to shut oil down sometime. And these are words of kind of disguised in hope that things are going to get better. We're going to stop mining on oil fields in Alberta and other parts of the country. But in the meantime, they're going in and drilling anyhow. They're not stopping. So when they say that, it's sort of misleading the people. Not just us Indigenous people, but the people in British Columbia and Canada for that matter. You know, there are people in this world, in this country, Canada, there are people in Alberta that are opposed to Kinder Morgan because they've already saw what happened to their land. And we seem to be convinced that it's not going to happen, some of the citizens. But because of what we've experienced, we've seen so much of the disaster in our land. We see the mountains coming down almost every winter, another big landslide, and the mountain is getting smaller and smaller because there's nothing to hold the land in place. The forest is gone. They have these small little trees like that. Well, those trees can't hold the water that comes down. There's no resistance there. So when we talk about trying to find an alternative to talking with government and the corporate world, the mechanisms are not there yet. You know, we've been deceived so many times that it's hard to imagine that maybe they're telling the truth this time. Maybe. And we see odd pieces of hope, you know, where we see the province and other provinces saying, you know, we got to stop at some point. This has got to come to an end, because they've seen what's happening to their land. You know, the farmers in the interior of British Columbia, they know what's happening. You know, they're losing land, and the land is disappearing because it's being flooded. The cattlemen people, the cattle association, the farmers, they're in the same boat as we are. They see their livelihood and a way of life disappearing. That's what they see. So I think when you look at how do we deal with the business community, you know, it's hard to imagine that they're prepared to make some sacrifices. Because as far as they're concerned, if the profit doesn't show at the end of each fiscal year, you know, even if they have billions and billions of dollars, they're not happy. So how much is enough? How much is enough to survive in this world? For us, we already know. We have nothing left. Our beaches are dead. The mountain, all the animals are disappearing. And the interior part of British Columbia and northern Canada, the caribou, they're disappearing. All of these things, the signs are there. But I don't know what the answer is for that. Why it's so hard to convince government that it's gotta stop at some point. You know, how do you, it's not just reconciliation with Indigenous people. Mm-hmm. It's reconciliation with the land.
With the earth,
and reconciliation with the ocean. And reconciling the air that we once breathed. Bring it back. It's not happening.
I completely agree with you. You have only talk from this government. It's obviously a government that signed of the Declaration of the Indigenous Right, United Nations, and meanwhile keep an act like the Indian Act still in existence. It's no wonder you hear all that positive talk from them. It's a lot of hypocrisy there. But in regard, you mentioned earlier there was some progress in regard to some land issue with some tribes happening recently. And I don't know if that connected to Kinder Morgan.
Well, the animals and the fish and those that live in the ocean told us a long time ago. You know, and one of the first shows I done with you a few months ago, the elders said 1947, the water's getting warm. We got to talk to somebody because the fish are going further and further away from our fishing ground. Mm-hmm. But because we don't have a degree, a diploma, or we're not in a position of authority, that they don't listen to us. This is 1947. Mm-hmm. And now we're in real trouble. You know, we're not only the water, the climate change, but now we've got disaster in the ocean and on the land. People who, we should learn from what the Chinese people are going through. They can't even walk around with a mask on their face because the air is so bad. But we're stubborn people. We want to still think we can do it our way and everything's going to be fine. Well, that's not so. The government and the corporate world has got to come to terms with what they're doing. If they can't do that, then the consequences are devastating. You know, all across North America. It's already here. But we're turning a blind eye to the evidence that's become visible in the United States and here in British Columbia. The forest fires we had last summer, the trees are too small. They can't hold water anymore. And because of that, those trees, little trees, dry up and they go straight up like that. They don't grow because there's no water. So the trees then are the first indicators that, you know, if you have a forest fire, those trees are going to explode. They're burned quickly. There's no resistance left on the land. So I'm not saying this because I'm smart. The elders talked about this long time ago. And because we wanted to get an education so badly, we went to school, and when we wouldn't go to school, they made us go to school anyhow. You know, the creation of residential school, boarding homes, continuously eliminating our culture, our language, and our history till a point where it doesn't even exist in some parts of Canada, British Columbia. A lot of our children don't know who they are. They have no identity other than what's provided by the Indian Act, status cards. So that, see, government is, they call it a democracy, but it's not. It's not a democracy. It's more of an apartheid system, not just on Indian reservations, by the way. It's spreading
as
throughout the country.
As a whole society. Be back just in a minute. Welcome back, and we were just talking with Elder Taslak about some progress lately in regard to land issue. You mentioned, Elder Taslak, that there's some tribes are getting some land back, and I don't know if that issue connected with Kinder Morgan. You started talking by laying out some background about that, so please, what do you have to say about this?
Well, when we first had this issue with Bamberton Project a few years ago, we hired a person to give us an idea when they asked us. In fact, it was the Premier of British Columbia, the guy that just died a few days ago. What's his name now?
I don't know.
Anyway, he asked me one time, where is your land that you know from history? So I told him, I said, the land that we own and know is ours is spoken in our language. So I said, if you're asking me where it's at, I'll tell you. The Coast Salish land begins in Paul River. That's the Halkaminam Sanchothan people. It starts from Paul River and comes south and crosses over onto Comox, Campbell River, Comox area. And that crosses over. And that Comox is the boundary between the Coast Salish and the Kwagyuth people. So when we looked at that, we asked our worker, what does that mean in acreage and land? So he got on a paper and pencil, and about a week later he come back, he says, this is how much land you're talking about. We looked at it, it's about over 550,000 square miles, over 600 million acres of land is what we were talking about when we did that study and looked at where the boundaries were of the Coast Salish language and where it ended. And when we looked at that, we said, oh, we got a big job ahead of us. We got to, how do we get 560,000 square miles back? And how do we get back 600 million acres of land back? What the government's looked at, when we look at the treaty-making process with the province of British Columbia and Canada, what the federal government did and the province did, they said, we will negotiate on what we can come to terms with, what we can agree with, that we're prepared to give you. And we said, what do you mean, how do you give me something that I own? It's been our land for thousands of years, and now you're going to give it back to me. If you want to give me back 560,000 square miles, yes. 650 million acres of land, yes, we'll take it back. But that's not what's happening. What they're doing is they're giving little chunks of land back to our people. And they call it in good faith that they're doing this. But when you look at what we actually know in terms of our land tenure, and we use the language, by the way, to define, identify the land that belonged to our people for thousands and thousands of years. So when we look at what they're talking about, giving land back to us, maybe 100 acres, maybe 200 acres. I don't know the exact amount. But that's not what we were talking about. What we were talking about is the acknowledgement and the recognition is that we were the sole owners of 650 million acres of land and 550,000 square miles. That's what we were talking about. But that's not what's happening. And a lot of ways, some of our people say, well, it's better than nothing. But I look at the situation we're in. If we're ever to compete in any industry, whether it's real estate or tourism or anything, the land is not there. It's just not there. So when we look at then at what we know belong to us according to our own work, our own study, looking at that 550,000 square miles and looking at 650 million acres of land. That's not what's happening. But I guess out of desperation, a lot of our people have opted in, say, well, let's get what we can and see what happens. For me, I have a hard time with that because of the language that I know, both languages, the Sanshat and Al-Qaminam, says more than what the federal government and the provinces are talking about. It's more than that. I don't know if they'll ever be able to come to terms with what we know and what they're offering us. Sometimes it looks like the light's gone out, you know. Okay, now we gave you some land back, go home and leave us alone. You know, that's what the province and the federal government want. But the question of how do we arrive at reconciliation and reconciling our culture and our history when it's not there? And that's what's happening in the some of the land agreements that are happening with a number of tribes in this country, province. And
Is that connected to Kinder Morgan and some of them?
Yeah, it includes all of that. Well, the Kinder Morgan process comes right through treaty water. You know, right from the time it reaches the Gulf Islands, those waters are under treaty. All through Georgia Strait, Puget Sound, Juan de Fuca, these are all treaty waters. It's under treaty. But Kinder Morgan doesn't realize that. And maybe we're going to have to tell them about it. That you don't have, this water was protected by the Canadian government and you can't come through here unless we say so. That's kind of where we're at with our treaty. The federal government, I think, is desperately trying to keep that in abeyance so that it doesn't reach that kind of talk. But we know, you know, all Georgia Strait, Puget Sound, both sides of the border, the Americans are under treaty on the Treaty of 1855. That's the American tribes on that side of the border. And those waters are under treaty. But because the way the government behaves in the United States, it's a pretty difficult job with them.
You mean with a government like, with a president like Trump?
Yeah. Well, I don't know where that guy begins and where he ends, you know, it's hard to talk about. Because just when you think he's going to say something right, he does so many things wrong, but that's what the people voted for, and that's what they deserve.
Actually, that's what I believe that's what the American people deserve. This is the product that the American corporation, American education, American university produced. Somebody like a Trump. So it's really, I think it was amazing to have this person to become a president, because now the whole world they see their ignorance, their racism, their out of touch of reality. But still, I mean, anyway, it's if that happened. But now we are going to face the talk of a person like Trump now and his decisions.
Well, you know, in spite of the Supreme Court decisions in this country, called Canada and British Columbia, the corporate world doesn't believe in law and justice.
Mm-hmm.
They find ways to maneuver around. They convince government that, yeah, we'll put that Kinder Morgan project through, and we'll promise you that it's going to be okay. They're promising the wrong people. They're promising the government of Canada. They got to promise us, the ones that hold title to the water, the treaty title.
Mm-hmm.
We're the owners of that water yet. We didn't negotiate it away. Our treaty says that. So Kinder Morgan has got a long way to go when they come into the water. It's going to be a different story. But I think the bureaucrats, I think, are kind of responsible for that, both the federal and to some degree the province. But these are treaty waters on both sides of the border. So we have to find ways to not to compromise our treaty, but to accommodate the necessary things that have to happen in Canada. And we've been saying that now for, God, forever. You know, we said we have an agreement with the Crown, and you better start respecting it. And we kept going to court. Supreme Court keeps coming down on our side, mm-hmm. But the federal government never gives up. They spend millions and millions of dollars fighting against a treaty that they created. It's their work too. And the Canadian public is being cheated out of their tax dollars because the government fights a treaty that is in place that protects our right. It was the government that agreed to that, to protect these waters for ourselves. We agreed to that, including the land. But they think Kinder Morgan has got power. Well, we'll find out in a little while what power really means. You know, if the Supreme Court has already made that decision on our behalf, more than once, by the way, then I think they're going to have to think about coming through our water, because it's all, as far as we're concerned, it's treaty water. We have the right to hunt and fish as formally as if we were the sole occupants of the land. That's what our treaty says. So, and being the sole occupant of the land, we have a right over those waters then. But you know, the intimidation goes on. And this is the part, I think, that needs to be addressed. When you look at the issue of how the missing women, murdered girls process is moving, it's not moving. It's, you know, there's demonstrations from one end of Canada to the other end, and the government is not listening. They're giving them a couple of $1 million and let them spend that, and they'll come back again and ask for more.
And you mean this is an indication about how serious the government is?
Yeah, the sincerity is not there. And you look at what happened in Atlantic Canada just a week ago,
mm-hmm.
a little over a week ago, when the government agreed on, it says, it was on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And what they said was, we should bring the law of bounty hunting for Indians, on Indians again. So, you know, kill us, shoot us, that's what they're saying.
This is last week. Okay. This is last week.
Yeah, it was on Facebook. You know, it showed up on APTN that we should put the bounty law back again so we can deal with these people. And the other issue was when that young fella got shot in Saskatchewan. And it was the police that said this. They said, well, we're sorry he died, but he probably deserved it. This is the law saying that we deserve to be killed. And that brings a lot of the questions that we have to ask ourselves. Why do we continue to trust these people who talk this way? You know, the Prime Minister says we're going to walk hand in hand, and we're going to bring discrimination, prejudice, racism to an end. Well, you got people that have got a different opinion. You know, put a bounty on these people and let's keep them quiet. And maybe they deserve to be shot and killed. That's what they're saying. And this is just in the last couple of weeks. So when we look at truth and reconciliation, how do you do that when you got people like that still think that way? I know there's organizations in Canada that hate people in general. You know, something like what the Americans have, the Ku Klux Klan or something like that. We know that it exists in Canada. It's here. And they can't be flushed out for whatever reason. I don't know why. But this whole idea of piecemealing justice, it's not going to work. They give us our own police force, but the police force they give us has got to be the same as the police force that's been killing us. That's one elder said a few years ago, a couple of years ago, I think, from the Stalo Nation. He said, the police have been given the only right to kill a person and get away with it. That's what one elder said from the mainland about 2 or 3 years ago when he spoke at a justice conference. The policemen are the only legitimate killers in the world. That says something when an elder can say that. So then when you look at truth and reconciliation, you know, we have to be there as equals. And equal doesn't mean the same. We're not going to be French, we're not going to be English, but we want an equal right to say and the kind of justice that's fair to our people. That's what we talk about. And that's not what's happening. You know, we continue to have these laws passed, come down, and imposed on us. And how do you reach conciliation, truth and reconciliation, when the legislators in Ottawa say that? You know, last time I was here, we talked about this lady, and I think she's with the Conservative Party. Senator said that we should give up our status and become like everybody else. That's never going to happen. I was born in this land. I can't be a Frenchman. I can't be an Englishman. I'm who I am. And they're never going to take that away. Because, you know, that's one thing our people will fight for. They'll go to war for it if they have to. But the government is so determined, you know, that, you know, these two people, the guy that shot that Indian boy, they found him not guilty. And the girls that was murdered at Fontaine, that man's not guilty. So you can kill. It's legal now, I guess, to kill First Nations people. And that's hard to be positive when these kind of things are happening to Indigenous people in this country. You know, one guy said to me, I met him on the street, and he says, I know you. He says, I've seen you on television. I says, well, I hope you appreciate that. I said, well, you know we've made mistakes in the past, but why can't we forget it and move on? And Charlie answered that question. He said, yes, it's happened 50, 60 years ago, but it's still happening today, so how can I forget? That was Charlie's answer. And I think that's the right answer. How can we forget?
And Elder Teslak, we, we are out of time, but this is really something very important to say. How can we forget? And we are not really forgetting, and the whole process of the show is to talk about this stuff, and I hope in 2 weeks from now we'll have another chance to talk with you again about this issue. Thanks again for being on Indigenous Voice, and thanks for watching today's show.
Hi, each and every one of you for coming today. We just really appreciate that people have come forward, and I really want to thank my dear friend Belinda for always, and Earl for what they have to bring forward that remind us that our way of life is not artifact, it's not mythology, it's live today, and they are our curriculum. They are the ones that are helping to guide the youth. And that's what our concern is here with this process, is that we are here to protect the rights of the youth. 2/3 of the population of most of the Indigenous communities is youth, and we need to help provide and protect that way of life. We don't want salmon to be part of a mythology that's only reflected in artwork. It's real. It was one of the first gifts provided to our people to sustain us, as well as the cedar was provided as a gift to sustain us. It kindles quickly so that we can find warmth. It also provided our shelter. You didn't need tools to work with cedar. You could split cedar just using water and wedges. So it was one of the most important gifts for us, as well as provided for the transportation system. So that's what our concern is when you ask us, how do we reconcile Aboriginal rights and Crown? I think it's really important that Crown begins to understand none of this is consultation until you hear what we're saying. We're very opposed to economic development that is resource plundering, whether it's marine environment or it's the land environment. Resource plundering affects each and every one of us in our way of life. British Columbia has taken a lot of pride in its natural beauty, its natural resources, and here we are at the threshold of some serious exploitation that could cause our way of life to disappear completely. And for First Nations people, many of us, very concerned that as pipelines go through, as tankers go through, it affects the last existence of our remains in the land, of our artifacts in the land. Our place is removed from history as the land becomes developed, as it continues to be overturned. And we've had this, as Belinda talks about many of her stories, we've had many of our important, not artifacts, but important landmarks removed. And they tell us about important history, or about how our young people are to be taken through puberty. A stone bowl, for instance, removed from where it existed for probably centuries, just removed by non-native people wanting something that they consider to be valuable, that they need to have for their home, that they want to put in a fountain possibly in their garden. So that we're very concerned about what this impact will have on us as a way of life. I think that for me, thinking about the Salish Sea, now that it's been called the Salish Sea, that's something very significant, very important. It's there to be protected for all Salish people. It's a gesture of reconciliation, of recognition of those treaty rights, of those rights, as Earl said, existed and were practiced before proclamation, before the Royal Proclamation. And that we as saltwater people, before we had a Douglas Treaty, before we defended the Sanchez Bay Marina case, saltwater people were the richest people in the world. We were taught that by one of our great teachers, Dave Elliott Sr., that we never had to hunger for food, we never had to beg for money. because everything that we needed was provided for us by the riches of the sea. Where we live in Sale is one of the most important saltwater mudflats. And mudflat is very distinct in all the life forms that it provides. It's all there to provide and build on each system, sustaining each other. So that the eelgrass is there for the crab, it's also there for the 5 different kinds of salmon. They court each other in there. As well, there's many medicinal plants that are there to help clean the water and keep it clean. The barnacle life is there to keep the water clean. And we see all of that disappearing. Very, very concerned that wave action has an impact on that. Spills have an impact on that. And Earl talked about that wave action, the vibration, that we don't know all of what it does to the microsystems that are in the water. And in Sanderson Bay, we also have the freshwater, saltwater marsh. It's a very distinct feature of the environment that has a very distinct purpose. Without it, there are microorganisms that will die off. So we have a great concern as this kind of economic development tries to push its way into our territories. And we're not just a land-based people, as many people have said here. We are marine-based. We have names of our places, places where we've been, places where we've lived. And our land base is very small because we didn't need to have an accumulation of land because we've used the water, we used the lands. Our families camped in very regular places. They met up in very regular places. They used the land in a very specific way. And that kept us strong as people, kept us united as people. Belinda provided her name, her Indian name that was given to her. My name is Tiwanama, and that name comes to me from Nanaimo. And that's to remind us where we originate from, where our mothers originate from. That's my great-great-grandmother's name, given to my mother, and then now given to me and given to my daughter. So it reminds us of who we're related to, but it also reminds us of where we come from, and so that if we do happen to be in a territory and we do want to have some fishing privileges or hunting privileges, we may have relations there if we share our name. So that often is something that we do, share our name. And I think that it is just a real concern, again, that we think about the cumulative effects of this kind of development. And it starts from that very small system, the algae system, the one-cell life form. I think it's very much of a concern. I saw a lady from Connecticut one time singing to a little one-celled animal, and that animal started to dance as she was singing. And she was just reminding us about how important our connection is to the smallest system. And much of the artwork reminds us of that all the time. The messages, the most important messages come to us from the smallest messengers. So you will often see a mouse as your most important messenger. A very humble being will come to you and provide that message. And I think that's how we as First Nations people are coming forward. We may be small in terms of what we're able to bring forward. We may not be able to have a lot of policy analysts, research at our disposal, lawyers at our disposal, but we come with a very important, clear message to save the environment. And it's not to save the environment for us to this day, but to save it for the generations of children that are ahead of us. And a real concern for us is that what sustains us as a people is our way of life. What sustains us as a people are our teachings. We want that to help our youth, to ground them in what's good about their identity, what's strong about their identity. And we want to make sure that we stand tall for the environment for them. We cannot just lay down and let this happen without saying something. This is not right. This is not consultation, because somewhere along the line, the minds have been already made up by the federal and provincial government. failing over and over and over again to recognize what has been put before you already about Aboriginal rights, Indigenous rights, First Nations rights, Douglas Treaty rights, whatever you want to call it. It's there. It's been laid out before you, and you need to recognize it and uphold it as we try to do, because it's very important. And I know I grew up on that mudflat, and I reflect over and over again how I used to watch our fishermen go out there. And like Belinda and others have said, the reef net fishery was a practice. But as we knew when we grew up, it was easy to get fish. It was easy to hunt ducks. They were there in vast quantity for us. Our table was set for us, and that's what Dave Elliott told us and wanted to instill in us, that we were the richest people in the world. And that mudflat has a particular smell, and some people don't like it. But when you walk up there on it, you can just see how alive it is, all of the different features of it. And we know very much that the eelgrass is damaged by boats, by tankers, just by people. We know how important that feature is to our bay, but also everywhere. We can't understand why the province allows those products to be harvested, and they call it aquaculture. And that's destroying as well our sea urchin. And the sea urchin is one of the most important products that we have. And it's being marketed internationally, but we cannot get it to sustain ourselves as a basic food. And now it's a medicine for the old people, and it's a gesture of respect because it's so hard to come by. So I think that we're asking to be heard, but we're saying time and time again very consistently that we do not want to have these kind of developments happening in our waters or on our land. The hunting and fishing rights are there forever. They are not to be extinguished. They are not to be infringed upon. Those were things that were told to us by the government of the day. We've been given other words: accommodation, mitigation, restoration, reconciliation. And a lot of times it's us who bear the burden of telling you what that means. Yet we've consistently said the same thing. It means let us live as people free in our own homeland and using the land and the water together to sustain us as strong, healthy people. I find that the whole process has been very disrespectful, it's very confusing, and it's very coercive. In many situations, the first thing that comes to our tables is the offer of a mutual benefits agreement. And I think that's very coercive to do that to people who are struggling with major health issues, issues of housing, and issues of really no economy, no way to build up an economy to sustain the people. So I really think that if you're taking anything back to the National Energy Board, it's to really go back to the table and really talk about mitigation. We were talking to them about mitigation, meaning how are we going to sustain the salmon fishery? How are we going to ensure that the waters are safe for the whale? And then all the other microsystems, as we said, that we talked about that are so important. We look at the Fraser River, we look at all of these estuaries that are so important to us. Will they be there if there's that wave action? And that's a big concern. And we already know what's happening to our salmon, that it's not even wild salmon anymore, that it's been contaminated, and that was an economic development idea. So I think we need to be careful in what we do as we step forward, but I think that it's been really clear from First Nations that we've said no thank you to this, and how do we push back? So I just want to say hi Skahela, and I really hope that you will hear people today and tomorrow and throughout the time that you're traveling, that you will hear what people are saying, and you understand that it's very hard to come forward to processes like this because so much of our words get interpreted as consultation. It's not consultation until we actually are heard, and particularly in British Columbia. British Columbia exists at the goodwill of First Nations. British Columbia is still unceded First Nations territory.
Very nice. Thank you.